After my husband passed away, I lived alone and wasn't ready to mingle, as people say. Yet, the crushing weight of loneliness drove me to share a moment with my dog, a memory that still lingers with a bittersweet hint of regret. But before I delve into that, let me tell you a bit about myself. I've always embraced my body, with its curvaceous and beautifully plus-size shape. My measurements are 46 inches at the bust, 38 inches at the waist, and 50 inches at the hips. Life hasn't been kind to me, especially since losing my husband, Michael, 2 years ago. Michael's death left a void so vast it felt impossible to fill. It was just me and my stepson, Ethan, trying to navigate our lives in the aftermath. Ethan was 20 at the time, juggling college and his own grief, while I managed part-time work and kept our small home running. Still, the emptiness in the house was overwhelming, even with Ethan there. 6 months after Michael's death, tragedy struck again. My best friend, Sarah, died in a car accident. Sarah and I had been inseparable since high school, and losing her felt like losing a part of my soul. In the wake of her passing, I took in her dog, Henry, a golden retriever with soulful eyes and an uncanny ability to sense emotions. Henry quickly became my rock, easing some of the pain left by the loss of the 2 people I loved most. He followed me everywhere, his wagging tail a quiet reassurance that I wasn't completely alone. Late at night, when the loneliness became unbearable, I would sit on the couch, stroking his fur and whispering secrets I hadn't shared with anyone else. But one night, everything changed, shattering the fragile sense of normalcy Ethan and I had managed to rebuild. It was a cold, rainy evening. Ethan was out at a friend's house, and I decided to indulge in a long, relaxing bath. After preparing the tub, I realized I'd left the towels downstairs. With the house empty, I wandered down in my birthday suit to retrieve one. Caught up in the quiet of the night, I wasn't thinking about Henry lounging in the corner. I bent over the laundry pile, looking for a towel, when I suddenly felt an unexpected sensation behind me. Startled, I leapt up, exclaiming in surprise, only to see Henry with his goofy, head-tilted expression, as if he were asking, "What's wrong?" I sternly told him, "Stay out of there, you little rascal," trying to shake off the awkwardness of the moment. Then, the front door opened. Ethan stood in the doorway, his umbrella dripping onto the floor, his eyes darting between me and Henry. "Grace, what the hell?" he demanded, his voice thick with disbelief and anger. I tried to explain, stumbling over my words, but nothing I said could undo what he thought he'd seen. He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The next few days were unbearable. Ethan barely spoke to me, and when he did, his words were cutting and cold. I felt as though I'd lost not only his respect but also the fragile bond we had left. Eventually, I found the courage to sit him down and apologize. With tears streaming down my face, I confessed how lonely and lost I had felt since Michael's death. I told him how much I valued him and how deeply ashamed I was for crossing a line that should never have been blurred. Ethan listened silently, his jaw tight, but when I finished, he let out a deep sigh and said, "I don't understand why, Grace. But I see you're hurting. I just want you to be okay." A few weeks later, Ethan approached me with a surprising suggestion. "You need someone in your life," he said, hesitant but determined. "You can't keep being alone." To my shock, he had been talking to his best friend, Ryan, a kind, understanding man who had been a steady presence in our lives since Michael's passing. Ethan thought we might be a good match, and to my surprise, Ryan agreed. It wasn't easy to let someone in again, but with Ethan's encouragement, Ryan and I began to see each other. Slowly, I started to heal. Ethan's forgiveness and Ryan's quiet support reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's a way forward. Through it all, Henry remained by my side, though now with a lot more boundaries. It's amusing how life can take an unexpected turn when you least anticipate it. I'm Victoria, and this is the tale of how a small misunderstanding nearly derailed my marriage. You might assume the title of this story is a joke. Cheating with our cat. I assure you, it's not a joke, but it is a lesson I won't soon forget. It all began on a calm Tuesday night. My husband, Mark, was away at a business conference, leaving me with our overly affectionate Maine Coon, Mr. Whiskers. Being someone who thrives on routine, I spent the evening lounging in the living room, scrolling through social media, and sipping chamomile tea. That's when James, an old college friend, messaged me. "Hey, Victoria. Long time no talk. How's life treating you?" I hadn't spoken to James in years. He was one of those friends who was always around but never crossed any boundaries. Someone I trusted completely. James had a charismatic charm that put you at ease. His message seemed harmless, so I replied, "Hey, James. Wow, it's been ages. Life's good. What about you?" Our chat started as casual small talk, catching up on careers, family, and life. But as the hours passed, I found myself enjoying his company more than anticipated. It wasn't inappropriate, but there was a nostalgic comfort in reminiscing about old memories with someone who knew a version of me from before marriage and adulthood. The messages soon turned into a phone call. We laughed, joked, and shared stories from the past. It felt like reconnecting with an old part of myself. But then, as we talked about our favorite professors and how bad we were at economics, Mr. Whiskers jumped onto my lap, purring loudly into the phone. "Who's that?" James asked, laughing. "Oh, that's Mr. Whiskers, my giant fur ball of a cat," I said, scratching behind his ears. "Still the crazy cat lady, I see." James teased. "Guilty as charged," I replied, chuckling. At some point, I casually mentioned that Mark was out of town. James didn't seem to think much of it, but in hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned it. Before I knew it, the clock struck midnight. "All right, I should let you go before Mr. Whiskers gets jealous," James said jokingly. "Good night, James," I replied with a smile, hanging up the phone. The next morning, I awoke to Mr. Whiskers knocking my coffee mug off the table. As I cleaned up the mess, I felt a twinge of guilt. Not because I thought I'd done anything wrong, but because I hadn't mentioned the call to Mark. Was it really a big deal? Probably not, but keeping it a secret didn't sit well with me. Later that day, I received another message from James. "Had a great time catching up last night. Let's not wait so long to talk again." I hesitated before replying. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to him again, but I didn't want to cross any lines. "Same here. Let's keep in touch," I finally wrote. And that should have been the end of it. But life has a peculiar way of turning a seemingly harmless moment into chaos. A few days later, Mark returned from his trip. I was excited to see him and ensured everything was perfect for his return. His favorite dinner, a clean house, and even a fresh haircut for Mr. Whiskers. But something felt off. Mark seemed distracted, almost distant. Initially, I attributed it to work stress, but as the evening progressed, his mood didn't improve. "Is everything okay?" I finally asked as we sat down for dinner. He hesitated, then looked me straight in the eye. "Victoria, is there something you need to tell me?" My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know," Mark said, leaning back in his chair. "You tell me." For a moment, it felt like the air had left the room. Could he have somehow discovered my chat with James? But how? I hadn't breathed a word of it to anyone, and I was sure James wouldn't have either. "Mark, I genuinely don't know what you're referring to," I said, bewildered. He exhaled, frustration etched on his face. "All right, maybe I'm just imagining things." The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. The following day took an even stranger turn. While I was folding laundry, Mark entered the room, holding my phone. "He's James?" he asked, his tone icy. My stomach sank. "He's an old college friend," I replied, attempting to sound nonchalant. Mark arched an eyebrow. "And why is he texting you about how much he enjoyed your late-night chats?" I felt my face go pale. "Mark, it's not what it seems," I stammered. "We were just catching up." "Nothing happened." "Nothing happened," he echoed, clearly skeptical. "Victoria, you didn't even mention you were talking to him. How am I supposed to trust that?" I wanted to explain, but the words failed me. I hadn't done anything wrong, yet I'd kept it from him, making it appear as though I had something to conceal. By evening, the tension was unbearable. Mark remained silent, and I was at a loss for how to mend things. Then, out of nowhere, Mr. Whiskers leaped onto Mark's lap, purring loudly. "You know," Mark said, petting the cat, "I'd trust Mr. Whiskers over you right now." It was a joke, or at least I hoped it was. But it hurt all the same. That night, sleep eluded me. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized just how delicate trust can be. What began as an innocent chat with an old friend had snowballed into a full-blown crisis. The days that followed were tense, to say the least. Mark spoke to me only when necessary, his words terse and clipped. I couldn't fault him for being upset. Trust had clearly been shaken. But I was at a loss for how to repair it. It was during one of these painfully quiet evenings that the unexpected occurred. I was on the couch, nervously petting Mr. Whiskers, when Mark entered holding his phone. His expression was a mix of confusion and amusement. "Victoria," he said, his tone lighter than it had been in days. "We need to talk." I braced myself, expecting another round of questioning. "Okay," I said cautiously. Mark handed me his phone. On the screen was a screenshot of an Instagram story. It was a picture of me on the couch, laughing with Mr. Whiskers on my lap. The caption read, "Reunited with my old flame and his jealous competition." James had posted it. I stared at the screen, incredulous. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. Mark crossed his arms. "That's what I'd like to know." Suddenly, everything clicked. This was the reason for Mark's strange behavior. He'd seen the post and leaped to conclusions. "Mark, I swear I had no idea he posted this," I said quickly. "He was joking about Mr. Whiskers being jealous of our conversation. That's all it was." Mark frowned, still skeptical. "And you didn't think to tell me you were talking to him at all?" I sighed, feeling a mix of guilt and frustration. "I should have. I see now that keeping it from you made it look like I had something to hide. But I promise, nothing happened. James is just an old friend." Mark sat down, his expression softening a bit. "It's not just about the post, Victoria. It's about not telling me. Trust isn't just about not doing anything wrong. It's about being open and honest." His words hit me hard. He was right. I hadn't done anything wrong in talking to James. But by not being transparent, I'd sown seeds of doubt. That night, Mark and I had a long, heartfelt conversation. I explained how the chat with James had stirred nostalgia for a simpler time in my life. But it was entirely platonic. "I guess I feared you'd think I was trying to relive the past," I confessed. Mark looked at me, his expression softening. "Victoria, I'm not concerned about your past. What matters to me is our present. I just need to know that we're in this together, that we can trust each other." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I promise, Mark. No more secrets." The following day, I decided to call James to set some boundaries. Hey, James, I said, trying to keep my tone light. Victoria, what's up? He replied cheerfully. I paused for a moment before speaking. Listen, I've really enjoyed catching up with you, but we need to be mindful of how we communicate. That Instagram post caused some issues between me and Mark. James immediately apologized. Oh no, I didn't mean to cause any trouble, I was just joking around. I'll take it down right away. Thanks, I said, feeling relieved. I just think it's best if we keep our conversations casual and occasional. Mark and I are working on our relationship, and I don't want anything to interfere with that. James agreed, and we ended the call on good terms. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I focused on rebuilding our trust. We started spending more quality time together, going on date nights and having open discussions about our feelings. Then, one evening, something unexpected happened. Mark came home with a small box in his hands. He placed it on the kitchen table and gestured for me to open it. Inside was a tiny collar with a tag that read, "Trusty the cat, always watching." I burst out laughing. "You're never going to let me live this down, are you?" I said, wiping tears of laughter from my eyes. "Not a chance," Mark replied, grinning. We decided to keep the tag as a reminder of the lessons we'd learned about communication, trust, and the importance of not jumping to conclusions. As for Mr. Whiskers, he became a symbol in our relationship, a reminder that even the most innocent things can cause chaos if we're not careful. Looking back, I realize how close we came to letting a small misunderstanding turn into a big problem. But in the end, it brought us closer together. And as strange as it sounds, I'll always be grateful for that crazy, dramatic, ridiculous moment in our lives. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that trust, much like a cat, requires care, attention, and sometimes a good laugh to keep it alive. I'm Victoria, and describing the recent upheaval in my life as merely unexpected would be an understatement. For 8 years, I've been married to Michael, a man whose predictability is matched only by his kindness. I believed I understood everything about love and fidelity. Yet, life has a knack for testing even the strongest of bonds, often in the most unforeseen ways. Let me share how I found myself in a situation with my husband that defies easy explanation. Michael and I crossed paths in college. He was the guy with the gentle smile, the one everyone assumed would settle down in a small town, marry his high school sweetheart, and live a storybook life. And indeed, that's how our story unfolded. We fell in love, tied the knot, and welcomed Max, a golden retriever, into our lives, who became the child we never had. Life with Michael and Max was serene, comfortable, and perhaps, in retrospect, a bit too predictable. I never sought excitement outside our relationship, because I never felt the need. Michael was dependable, trustworthy, and always knew how to navigate any situation. But then, a twist came along that disrupted our world. About half a year ago, I began a new job at a local publishing firm, and that's where I encountered Adam. He was the antithesis of Michael. To be clear, nothing inappropriate transpired between us. Yet, I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a spark when Adam first entered my office. He was charismatic, spontaneous, and had a smile that hinted at hidden depths. For a while, I convinced myself that this feeling was harmless. Isn't it natural to be drawn to someone new, especially after years with the same partner? But as we spent more time together at work, ignoring these feelings became increasingly difficult. I found myself laughing too readily at his jokes, lingering during coffee breaks, and thinking about him on my drive home. One day, as I was leaving the office, Adam suggested we grab coffee after work. It seemed innocent, right? Just coffee. Besides, I could already imagine Michael at home, playing with Max as usual. So I agreed. And that's when things began to unravel. In the quiet of that little cafe, Adam opened up about his life, his family, and his dreams. I felt seen in a way I hadn't for years. With Michael, everything was stable and secure, but Adam made me feel alive. Our conversation stretched into hours, and before I realized it, night had fallen. I glanced at my phone, saw missed calls from Michael, and felt a stab of guilt. But I dismissed it, thinking it was merely a friendly connection with a colleague. When I finally returned home, Michael didn't say much. Just his usual gentle smile and a question about my day. I gave a vague response, mentioned working late, and headed straight to bed, trying to banish thoughts of Adam. But sleep eluded me that night. Guilt mingled with a thrill that left me feeling both exhilarated and ashamed. Days went by, and I convinced myself my feelings were harmless. Yet, as time passed, things only became more intense. Adam began texting me outside of work, messages that were friendly but carried an undertone of something more. I kept telling myself it was just innocent fun. After all, I hadn't crossed any lines. Yet. Then came the evening that altered everything. Michael was out with friends, leaving me alone at home. I had just put Max to bed when my phone buzzed. It was Adam, asking if he could drop by to return a book I'd lent him. I hesitated but convinced myself it was just a friendly gesture. A brief visit. No harm, right? He arrived soon after, and we sat on the porch, talking for what felt like an eternity. There was an intensity in his gaze that evening, something that made me feel like I was the only woman in existence. It was a magnetic pull, a temptation unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Yet, as much as I was drawn to that sensation, Max's barking brought me back to reality, reminding me of the life and the man waiting inside. Just then, the glare of headlights appeared in the driveway. It was Michael, arriving home earlier than expected. In a flurry of panic, I jumped to my feet, urging Adam to slip out through the back gate, and hurried inside, hoping Michael wouldn't notice any trace of my unexpected visitor. Michael entered, raising an eyebrow. "Why so flustered?" he asked, suspicion lacing his voice. I laughed it off, claiming I'd been cleaning and was surprised by his early return. But even as I tried to dismiss it, I sensed a shift. There was a new distance between us, a tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. That night, as I lay beside Michael, guilt gnawed at me. I hadn't truly done anything wrong, hadn't crossed any lines, but it felt as if I was teetering dangerously close to the edge. The next morning, Michael was unusually quiet, as if he sensed something was amiss. To compound my turmoil, Adam texted again, suggesting we meet for coffee. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to focus on mending whatever was unraveling between Michael and me. But another part, a side of me I barely recognized, longed to see him again. And so, against my better judgment, I went. As I drove to meet Adam, my mind raced. I knew it was wrong, yet the thrill was undeniable. Arriving at the cafe, I found him already there, smiling as always. He pulled out a chair for me, and we began our usual conversation. But this time, there was a different energy. His gaze was more intense, our conversation more intimate, leaving me utterly captivated. Hours slipped by, and when I checked the time, I realized I was late. Michael would be home any moment. Panicked, I mumbled a hurried goodbye and rushed to my car. On the drive home, I rehearsed excuses, telling myself I'd claim I stayed late at work. Taking a deep breath, I pulled into the driveway, trying to steady myself. But upon entering, I was met with silence. Michael wasn't there, but Max greeted me, tail wagging. I knelt to pet him, guilt washing over me. Max, ever the gentle, loyal companion, had always been a constant in our lives. The thought of betraying Michael's trust, even in this seemingly innocent way, felt wrong. I needed to end whatever was happening with Adam. The next morning, I resolved to tell Adam we couldn't continue seeing each other outside of work. Arriving at the office, I rehearsed my speech. But before I could speak, he surprised me with a simple, sincere apology. "I think we need to keep things professional," he said, as if reading my mind. "I didn't mean to complicate your life, Victoria. I respect you too much for that." Relief flooded over me, and I thanked him. We agreed to maintain our distance, focusing solely on work. I felt lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. With a newfound sense of peace, I returned home that evening, ready to dedicate myself fully to Michael once more. I wanted to focus on the man who had always been there for me, who had never given me a reason to doubt his loyalty. But that tranquility was short-lived. A few weeks later, Michael called me into the living room, his expression unreadable. I sat across from him, sensing something was wrong. "Victoria," he began slowly. "We need to talk." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I've noticed are distracted lately. It's like you're here, but not really with me." His words hit me hard. I felt the tension mounting but tried to maintain my composure. "What do you mean, Michael?" "I'm right here," I said, forcing a smile. He shook his head, unconvinced. "It's more than that, Vic. Even Max seems to sense something's off. He's been unusually clingy, as if he's picking up on something you're not sharing." I looked down, surprised. Could Max have sensed my internal struggle? He had been sticking close to me, offering an unspoken comfort I hadn't fully appreciated. Michael continued, his voice gentler now. "I don't know if it's just in my head, but it feels like there's someone else." My heart sank. There it was, out in the open. I didn't want to lie, but the thought of confessing everything was overwhelming. I took a deep breath and decided to be partially honest. "I won't lie, Michael. I've been feeling disconnected," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I met someone at work and felt a connection." "But it's not what you think," I added quickly, seeing the hurt in his eyes. "We just talked. Nothing more." Michael listened intently, truly listened, perhaps for the first time in years. He opened up about his own fears, how he worried about losing me, how he realized he hadn't been as present as he should have been. It was a raw, difficult conversation, but by the end, something had shifted between us. We both understood there was much to work on, and rebuilding trust would take time. But in that moment, with Max curled up between us, I felt hopeful. I had come perilously close to losing everything, yet somehow, we found a way to begin anew. Ultimately, I realized that what I had been seeking wasn't excitement or novelty. It was connection, a connection I already had, right here at home. And as for Max, our ever-loyal companion, he received more treats than he could have ever imagined that night. After all, he had been the silent hero in our story, reminding us of what truly mattered. Rachel lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling, as the bustling city sounds seeped through her window, unable to drown out her solitude. She had always been reserved, preferring her own company, but over time, the emptiness had intensified. Then she met Maximum. It was a rainy evening when she noticed him, a drenched, trembling stray dog, huddled at the street corner. Rachel typically ignored animals, but something in Max's gaze that day touched her deeply. She couldn't leave him there, so she brought him home. From that moment, Max became her constant companion, following her everywhere, never letting her out of sight. Initially, it felt reassuring. For the first time in ages, Rachel didn't feel utterly alone. Yet, over time, she began to notice something peculiar about Max's behavior. He wasn't merely protective, he was possessive. He barked at anyone who approached her, especially young men. If someone got too close, Max would growl until they retreated. Rachel soon found herself enamored with Maximum. Each night, their affectionate exchanges deepened their bond, and they would nestle together, finding solace in each other's presence. Their connection strengthened with each passing day, forming an undeniable bond. As months went by, Rachel's friends observed how she was never without Maximum. When visitors came to her apartment, Max's barking made normal conversation nearly impossible. When Rachel began chatting with Jake, a classmate, Max disapproved. The first time Jake visited to study, Max barked incessantly until Jake left, unable to concentrate. Jake didn't return, and Rachel increasingly found herself alone with Maximum. At first, she found Max's jealousy endearing. However, after losing several friends, she felt trapped. Max was her sole companion, and while she adored him, she started to question if his protectiveness was hindering her life. Determined to move forward and meet new people, Rachel tried to distance herself from Max. She dated a few men, hoping one might fill Max's place in her life. Yet, no one evoked the same feelings or passion Max did. Despite her attempts to move on, she was drawn back to Max time and again. Realizing she couldn't stop thinking about him, Rachel accepted that no one could replace him. Despite her social struggles, Rachel clung to her dream of studying abroad. Years of hard work paid off when she received a scholarship to a prestigious university overseas. Rachel was ecstatic. It was her opportunity to leave the city, start anew, and explore beyond her limited world. But one thing held her back. What about Max? Bringing him wasn't an option due to strict pet policies in student housing, and leaving him behind felt unbearable. Rachel was caught between her future and the dog who had been her steadfast companion. Just days before her flight, as she packed for the big move, her passport lay ready on the table. But after a quick trip to the store, she returned to find her passport shredded on the floor. Max sat amid the chaos, tail wagging, as if he had done nothing wrong. Rachel stood frozen, stunned by the scene. How had it come to this? Rachel's heart sank as the reality hit her. Her opportunity to leave had vanished in an instant. She attempted to salvage her passport, but it was beyond repair. The time required to obtain a replacement would be too long, and she would miss her chance. It was hard to fathom. Her dreams were slipping away, all because of Max. Conflicted, Rachel felt a surge of anger towards Max for what he had done, yet she couldn't entirely blame him. Perhaps he sensed her imminent departure and acted out of fear of abandonment. But was that a valid reason to sacrifice her future? Friends insisted she was too attached to Maximum. Her parents, unaware of the depth of her bond with the dog, advised her to prioritize her own well-being. Rachel began to wonder if they were right. Perhaps it was time to let Max go. That night, Rachel lay in bed, contemplating what to do about Maximum. Lately, his protectiveness had become overwhelming, as he insisted on accompanying her everywhere and monitoring her interactions. It was becoming suffocating, and she questioned whether she should finally let him go. Yet, as she pondered, she recalled how no other man made her feel the way Max did. He had an uncanny ability to bring her joy and satisfaction, unmatched by anyone else. The thought of finding that connection with someone new seemed improbable. Rachel realized that if she let Max go, she might never encounter anyone who could offer the same pleasure and intimacy. She feared disappointment with someone else and regretted losing Max. Some friends had stopped quarreling, weary of being barked at and driven away. Rachel tried convincing herself it didn't matter. As long as she had Max, she needed no one else. One day at school, a friend approached her during lunch, looking serious. "Rachel, I need to talk to you," she began. "The reason I stopped coming over is because of Maximum. Every time I visit, he goes wild, barking and chasing me. Honestly, I'm scared of him." Rachel was taken aback. "Max? But he's harmless. Just protective." Her friend shook her head. "It's more than that. It's not normal, Rachel. People are talking. They say your relationship with Max is unusual. It's awkward." A wave of embarrassment washed over Rachel. She hadn't realized how much people had noticed. She thought no one knew. Her friend continued, "I care about you, but this isn't right. You need to address this before it gets worse." Rachel sat in silence, her mind racing. She hadn't considered how her bond with Max might appear to others. Now it was clear that her relationship with him was causing more issues than she had acknowledged. That evening, Rachel watched Max curl up at her feet. She loved him, but the growing sense that something needed to change was undeniable. She couldn't continue living this way, confined by her attachment to him. She packed a small bag with Max's belongings and arranged for a friend to take him temporarily. It was one of the hardest decisions she had ever faced. But she felt it was necessary. Max looked at her with puzzled eyes as she led him to the door. For a moment, she nearly reconsidered. But she didn't. That night, Rachel lay in bed, alone for the first time in years. The apartment felt emptier than ever, the silence oppressive. She tossed and turned, missing Max's presence more than she had anticipated. The room felt cold and lifeless without him by her side. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized just how much she had relied on him. Rachel had initially believed that letting Max go was the right decision, but now she wasn't so sure. Unable to sleep, she dressed and ventured into the city to find him. The streets were quiet, with city lights casting long shadows. She found Max at her friend's place, his tail wagging excitedly as he saw her. Hugging him tightly, Rachel felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had always been cautious about who she allowed into her life. After everything with Max, she feared opening up to people again. Yet, when she met Daniel, something felt different. He was kind, humorous, and genuinely interested in her. Gradually, they began spending more time together, and for the first time in years, Rachel believed she could balance her life with Max and a new relationship. It wasn't long before Daniel invited Rachel to his home. He was on a month-long holiday from work and wanted to spend more time with her. "Come over," he suggested one evening. "We can relax, watch movies, maybe even cook together. I've got the whole month off." Rachel smiled, liking the idea, but she knew there was something she needed to address before agreeing. "Can I bring Max?" Rachel asked. Daniel paused, then laughed, thinking she was joking. "Wait, you're serious? You want to bring your dog?" Rachel nodded, explaining, "Max goes with me everywhere. I can't leave him behind. If Max can't come, I won't either." Daniel hesitated. He wasn't fond of dogs, and the idea of having one in his home was unappealing. He didn't understand Rachel's attachment to Max but didn't want to lose her over it. "I'm not really a dog person," he said cautiously, "but if that's what it takes, Max can come." Rachel was pleased with his response. She wasn't sure how Daniel felt about Max, but she was relieved he didn't push the issue. Max was her protector and companion, and she wasn't ready to prioritize anyone, even Daniel, over him. A few days later, Rachel and Max arrived at Daniel's apartment. Daniel opened the door with a nervous smile as Max trotted in behind Rachel. The dog sniffed around, exploring the new surroundings. Daniel watched uneasily, unsure how this would work but determined to try. Initially, everything went smoothly. Rachel and Daniel sat on the couch, chatting and laughing, while Max lay at Rachel's feet. Everything seemed peaceful until Daniel leaned in to kiss Rachel. As soon as his lips neared, Max sprang up, barking loudly, startling them both. Daniel recoiled, his heart racing. "Whoa! What was that about?" Rachel sighed, patting Max's head. "He's just protective. He'll get used to you." Daniel wasn't convinced. Every time he tried to get close to Rachel, Max barked fiercely, baring his teeth as if warning Daniel to stay away. Daniel tried to laugh it off, but the tension was mounting. He couldn't relax with Max glaring at him from across the room. Over the following days, Daniel noticed how much attention Rachel gave Maximum whenever he tried to hold her hand or cuddle. Max would bark or wedge himself between them. It was as if the dog was claiming Rachel as his own, and despite Daniel's patience, it was wearing thin. One evening, as they sat on the couch watching a movie, Daniel attempted to kiss Rachel again. But just like before, Max growled and barked, causing Daniel to back off. Frustrated, Daniel threw up his hands. "I can't do this, Rachel. Every time I try to get close to you, your dog loses it. I'm trying here, but Max doesn't like me." Rachel felt torn, loving Daniel but prioritizing Maximum. "He's just not used to you yet. Give him time, he'll calm down." Daniel shook his head. "It's been days." Max seemed to sense Daniel's discomfort, always positioning himself between them. Rachel understood Daniel's frustration, but the thought of life without Max was unimaginable. "I need Max," she said softly. "He's been there through everything." Rachel managed to keep a fragile peace between Max and Daniel. Daniel made efforts to get along with Max, and Max, though still possessive, began to relax around him. However, there was a deeper truth Rachel hadn't shared with anyone, not even Daniel. Whenever Daniel left for work or was away, Rachel turned to Max for solace. It became routine. As soon as Daniel was out the door, she'd sit with Max, stroking his fur, whispering secrets she wouldn't share with anyone else. Max was more than a pet, he was her confidant, her protector, filling a void no one else could. Rachel knew it wasn't typical. She understood she shouldn't feel this way, but she couldn't help it. Max had been her constant through loneliness, heartbreaks, and even her struggle to open up to Daniel. One evening, Daniel returned home, weary and frustrated. The moment he entered, Max began barking incessantly. Daniel had reached his breaking point, clenching his fists in an attempt to remain calm, but the noise overwhelmed him. "Enough!" Daniel shouted. "I can't take this anymore." Rachel rushed to soothe Max, but it was too late. Daniel turned to her, face flushed with anger. "You need to leave, Rachel. I'm done with you and that dog." Rachel's heart dropped. "Daniel, please," she pleaded. "Max didn't mean it. He's just protective." Daniel scoffed. "He's out of control. And I don't even know what's going on between you two. It's like you care more about that dog than anything else." "That's not true," Rachel cried. "I love you, Daniel. Please don't make me leave. I'll figure something out, I promise." But Daniel shook his head. "No, Rachel, I'm done. I can't live like this anymore, with you and your overprotective dog. It's too much." Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she realized Daniel wouldn't change his mind. She tried once more to plead, but he pointed to the door. "Go away. I don't want you here anymore." Heartbroken, Rachel gathered her things and, with Max by her side, left Daniel's home. Months later, Rachel met Robert. She loved him deeply and felt ready for a fresh start. She was weary of her past, especially the complicated bond with Max. Determined to make this relationship work, she focused on Robert. After months of dating, Robert proposed, and Rachel, elated, shared the news with her best friend, Angela. She couldn't wait to tell her. But along with the joy, Rachel felt compelled to confess something she'd hidden for a long time. During their conversation, she revealed her past with Max, admitting how close she'd become to the dog in a way that wasn't typical. Angela was shocked, but listened intently as Rachel begged her to keep it secret. Rachel understood her relationship with Max had been unhealthy, and she wanted to move forward, to start anew with Robert. Angela, still processing the revelation, promised to keep it confidential. She encouraged Rachel to fully address the issue, but Rachel asked for time. Rachel was determined to leave her past behind and focus on a new future with Robert, hoping for a fresh start. As she and Angela strolled down the street, Angela casually suggested, "Let me see this man you've been talking so much about." Rachel beamed, eager to show her friend the man she planned to marry. She pulled out her phone and opened a picture of Robert, handing it to Angela. The moment Angela saw the image, her heart skipped a beat. She tried to mask her reaction, but internally, she was taken aback. Robert wasn't just any man, he was her secret crush, someone she had admired from a distance for months. Angela had never mentioned him to Rachel, as she hadn't anticipated their paths crossing like this. Now, seeing Robert as Rachel's fiancé, Angela felt a mix of jealousy and disappointment. Maintaining her composure, she returned the phone to Rachel, feigning a smile. "He looks nice," Angela said, forcing cheerfulness, though she was struggling with the revelation. From that moment, Angela began sowing seeds of doubt in Rachel's mind. "You know," she mentioned one afternoon, "I actually know Robert's ex-girlfriend. She shared some things about him that aren't flattering. You should be cautious, Rachel." Rachel was taken aback. "Really? What did she say?" Angela hesitated, pretending to think. "Well, I don't want to go into too many details, but she mentioned Robert wasn't always truthful with her. He hurt her, and I don't want you to experience the same." Rachel frowned, uncertain of what to believe. "That doesn't sound like Robert at all. He's been nothing but kind to me." "I'm just looking out for you," Angela replied, trying to sound concerned. "I'm not saying you should leave him immediately, but maybe consider it carefully. You deserve someone truly good for you." Despite Angela's warnings, Rachel trusted Robert. She couldn't reconcile his character with Angela's portrayal. The more Angela pressed, the more resolute Rachel became about her choice to be with him. Over the following weeks, Angela continued to highlight Robert's alleged flaws. "I've heard more stories about him," she'd say, shaking her head. "He's not who you think he is, Rachel. You're making a mistake." But Rachel remained steadfast. She was in love, and nothing Angela said could sway her. Angela grew angry, feeling ignored by Rachel, and it pained her to know the man she had feelings for was about to marry her best friend. Angela's frustration simmered, and though she tried to conceal it, tension between them began to mount. Rachel noticed Angela's changed demeanor but didn't understand why. She assumed Angela was just concerned for her, unaware that jealousy was the true cause. One afternoon, Robert visited Rachel. As soon as he entered, Max began barking loudly, as he always did around newcomers. Robert froze, turning pale. He had always been uneasy around dogs, and Max's aggressive barking heightened his anxiety. Without saying much, Robert quickly retreated from the house, too afraid to stay. Rachel watched him leave, feeling embarrassed and frustrated. This was the breaking point. She loved Robert and wanted a future with him, but Max was becoming a hurdle she could no longer ignore. He had caused issues with Daniel before, and now he was scaring away the man she wanted to marry. It was time to make a difficult decision. That evening, Rachel resolved to act. She took Max to her neighbors, who were relocating to another city and had agreed to take Max into their home. The neighbors had always been fond of Max and had ample space for him. As she handed Max over, the dog whimpered and cried, sensing something was amiss. His sad eyes followed Rachel as she turned away. Rachel had made her decision, and she wasn't looking back. She was ready to embrace a future with Robert, free from the chaos Max had brought into her life. As she walked back to her house, a mix of sadness and relief washed over her. Letting Max go hadn't been easy, but she knew it was necessary. She had chosen love and was determined to leave the past behind, focusing on her future with Robert. Angela's attempts to spread rumors and lies about Robert had failed, leaving her frustrated. Watching Rachel move forward with her engagement made Angela desperate. Angela decided to take a different approach, threatening to reveal Rachel's past with Max unless she received a monthly payment. She demanded money, insisting that Rachel could afford it with the allowance Robert provided. Despite Rachel's protests about her financial situation, Angela was relentless. Left with no choice, Rachel agreed to Angela's demands, hoping to keep her quiet. As the months passed, Angela's greed grew, with her demands becoming increasingly burdensome. Rachel found herself overwhelmed, caught between planning her wedding and the weight of Angela's extortion. The closer the wedding approached, the worse things became. Rachel's once excited anticipation for her future with Robert was overshadowed by anxiety and fear. She knew she couldn't continue paying Angela indefinitely, but she felt trapped. Angela held too much power over her, and the threats seemed never-ending. Rachel reached her breaking point. The constant fear of exposure and Angela's threats were too much to bear. She realized she couldn't continue living this way, especially with her wedding approaching. One night, after another sleepless evening, Rachel resolved to tell Robert the truth. The following day, she sat him down, heart-pounding. She confessed everything: her unusual attachment to Max, Angela's blackmail, and the fear that had consumed her. She braced for Robert's reaction, expecting shock or anger, but he listened quietly, never interrupting. When she finished, silence hung in the air. Rachel looked down, unable to meet Robert's gaze, waiting for his response. Finally, he reached out, taking her hand and gently lifting her chin to meet his eyes. Robert admitted he wasn't perfect either. He shared that he had made mistakes in his past, things he regretted. He told Rachel that everyone errs, but what mattered was moving forward together without letting the past dictate their future. He forgave her, assuring her that her history with Max didn't change his feelings for her. He loved her for who she was now and wasn't going to let her past or Angela's threats ruin their future. Rachel was overwhelmed with relief. She had anticipated the worst, yet Robert had shown her compassion and understanding. For the first time in months, she felt liberated, free from guilt, free from Angela's control, and ready to embark on a new chapter with Robert. A few days after her confession, Angela called again, demanding her usual payment. Rachel, now empowered with newfound confidence, answered the phone. This time, there was no fear in her voice. Calmly, she told Angela to go to hell. Angela, taken aback by Rachel's boldness, paused before launching into threats of exposure. But Rachel remained unfazed. In a last-ditch effort, Angela decided to confront Robert directly, hoping to shatter Rachel's life once and for all. Dialing his number, she believed she could manipulate the situation to her advantage. But when Robert answered, her plan unraveled spectacularly. With a smug tone, Angela began revealing all the details, confident she could still sway Robert. She recounted how Rachel had been involved with Max in an unusual way and how she had been blackmailing Rachel for months, expecting Robert to be appalled. Instead, Robert's calm response caught her off guard. "I already know everything, Angela," Robert said, his voice unwavering. "Rachel told me herself, and I've forgiven her. Whatever you're trying to achieve, it won't work." A long silence followed on the other end. Angela was stunned. All her plotting, all her threats, had crumbled. In that moment, she realized she had lost. Robert remained steadfast in his support of Rachel, and nothing Angela did could change that. For the first time, Angela felt a pang of shame. She had allowed jealousy and bitterness to consume her, and now it had all collapsed. She searched for words to salvage her dignity, but found none. Defeated, she hung up, understanding that her friendship with Rachel and any influence she once wielded were gone. A few days later, Rachel and Robert's wedding day arrived. The weather was perfect, with the sun shining brightly. Rachel stood in her wedding dress, feeling as if a weight had been lifted. She radiated joy as she walked down the aisle, aware that she had overcome the toughest challenges with Robert by her side. The ceremony was beautiful, a celebration filled with love and happiness. Family and friends gathered to witness their union, oblivious to the trials they had faced. But none of that mattered anymore. Rachel had found true happiness, and nothing could take that away. As she and Robert exchanged vows, Rachel couldn't help but smile, knowing she had chosen love over fear, leading her to this moment. With the past behind her and a bright future ahead, Rachel was ready to begin her new life as Robert's wife. They sealed their vows with a kiss, met with applause and cheers, marking the start of a life filled with hope, trust, and love. Rachel's journey imparts a vital lesson about boundaries and honesty. The moral is clear: don't let your actions lead you down a path you know isn't right. Setting boundaries in all relationships, whether with people or pets, is crucial. And when mistakes are made, the only way forward is to confront them with courage and seek forgiveness, not just from others, but from yourself. Dear viewers, what lessons did you take from this dramatic tale? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, give us a thumbs up, share it with friends, and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our latest updates. Thanks for watching and stay blessed.